On our third wedding anniversary, Ethan and I got into a car crash. When the truck lost control and slammed into us, Ethan's first instinct was to shield the passenger seat. He held Chloe tightly in his arms, protecting her with his life. I was in the back seat, my lower abdomen pinned by the deformed metal. The pain was so agonizing that my breath shook. When the rescue team arrived, Ethan had already smashed the passenger door open, carrying Chloe out. A firefighter shone a flashlight into the car and yelled, "Is there anyone else inside?" 10 minutes before the crash, Ethan had personally closed the back door for me. I tried my best to raise my hand, wanting to tap on the window. But through the shattered glass, I heard his hoarse voice reply, "No, no one else. Take her to the hospital first. She's always been terrified of pain. She can't handle any shock." My hand froze in midair. When Chloe was lifted onto the stretcher, she only had a shallow scratch on her wrist from the glass. Yet Ethan held her hand tightly, looking like he had just recovered his most precious treasure. "Don't be scared. I'm here." From beginning to end, he never once looked back at the smoking car. Later, when the firefighters dragged me out of the back seat, my skirt was already soaked in blood. The doctor looked at my chart, his face darkening instantly. "Why did you bring her in so late?" "Her abdomen suffered severe trauma. We need to operate immediately." The nurse held the consent form and asked me, "Where is your family?" I looked toward the ward not far away. Chloe's scratch was so shallow it didn't even need stitches. But Ethan was guarding her bedside, his eyes red as he forced the doctor to examine her for the third time. I suddenly let out a soft laugh. "I don't have any family here. I'll sign it myself." After the surgery, I was wheeled back to the ward. The anesthesia wore off slowly, but the pain came back fast. My abdomen felt like it was being sliced open repeatedly with a knife. I didn't even dare to breathe too hard. The doctor stood by my bed, his voice very gentle. "We couldn't save the baby. It will be very difficult for you to get pregnant again in the future." I stared at the medical report. The words on it were clear, but I stared at them for a long time, unable to process what they meant. So I had been pregnant. And that child never even got a chance to be known by their father. In the next ward, Ethan's voice was more frantic than the doctor's. "Will her wrist scar? Did it damage her tendons? Check it again." The doctor explained patiently, "Mr. Vance, it's just a scratch. It doesn't even need stitches." But Ethan wouldn't let it go. "She's been sensitive to pain since she was a kid. Don't be careless." I turned my head away. Through the half-open door, I saw Chloe sitting on the hospital bed. She had a small band-aid on her wrist. Ethan was bending over, holding her hand, his eyes filled with intense worry. The nurse came over to change my dressing. The moment she peeled off the gauze, my fingers trembled from the pain. She stopped. "Where is your husband? Have him come in and support you." I looked at the room next door. Ethan was softly coaxing Chloe to drink some water. "He's not here." The nurse was stunned. She looked at the wedding ring on my finger, then at Ethan in the next room. "Isn't that man your husband?" I pulled my hand back under the blanket. The edge of the ring dug painfully into my palm. It hurt. "No. He's the family member of the patient next door." The nurse didn't ask further. She just made her movements much gentler. After a long time, Ethan finally came out of the room. He stood by my bed. Seeing how pale I was, he frowned slightly. "How are you feeling?" I was about to hand him the medical report, but Chloe called out from next door. "Ethan." His gaze shifted instantly. That belated bit of concern was pulled back before it could even reach me. "Get some rest first," he said. He turned and went right back to her. I crumpled the report in my hand. I suddenly remembered the day we got married 3 years ago. Chloe had just rejected Ethan. She told him she only saw him as a brother. Ethan stood in the pouring rain all night. The next day, he came to see me. His voice was incredibly hoarse. "Don't you like me? Let's give it a try." Back then, I thought I had finally waited long enough. I even secretly bought a bouquet of flowers. A small bouquet of baby's breath. I held it tightly as we went to the courthouse. But Ethan never looked at those flowers. When we took our marriage photo, he didn't smile either. The photographer had to remind him 3 times. Only then did he force a faint tug at the corner of his lips. I comforted myself back then. He was just hurt. People can slowly learn to love someone else. But 3 years had passed. Did he move on? No. The only one trapped in this marriage was me. Late at night, the lights in the next ward were still on. Ethan stayed by Chloe's side while she slept. He tucked her in, adjusted the AC, and placed a cup of water right by her hand. I had post-surgery bleeding. I had to press the call button to get the nurse myself. While the nurse was changing my sheets, my phone buzzed with a payment notification. Chloe's full checkups, the VIP suite, and her meals were all paid for by Ethan. My surgery fee, however, was paid with my own card. I looked at the payment screen. Suddenly, I felt so tired. It turned out a marriage could be split so cleanly. Where his heart was, that was where his money went. I folded the abortion report and stuffed it into my bag. Then I opened my phone. I logged into our company's relocation system. In the relocation application reason, I wrote only 4 words: will follow any transfer. I was discharged the next day. Ethan personally wheeled Chloe downstairs. Chloe looked glowing. She sat in the wheelchair, wearing his jacket. A thin layer of gauze was wrapped around her wrist. She looked more like a delicate piece of porcelain than a patient. I held onto the wall, slowly following behind them. Every step sent a sharp pain through my abdomen, making my vision go dark. The nurse ran out and called after us. "Mrs. Vance, you just had surgery. It's best if your husband supports you." Ethan paused. He looked back at me. I looked at him too. Chloe cleared her throat softly. Ethan immediately looked down at her. "Are you cold? Do you want another jacket?" In the end, his glance only brushed past me. In the parking lot, the driver opened the door. The back seat was piled high with Chloe's flower baskets, supplements, and medical bags. A soft cushion was laid out on the passenger seat. Ethan had put it there himself for Chloe. I stood by the car, the cold wind blowing into my collar. The gauze on my stomach throbbed. I asked him, "Where do I sit?" Ethan buckled Chloe's seatbelt without looking up. "Take an Uber back." My phone vibrated. He had sent me $200. The note read, "Stop making a scene." Chloe sat in the front seat and said softly, "Maybe Elena should sit here? She doesn't look well." Ethan shut her door. "She's always been tough. Always been tough. So I could handle the pain. I could handle the bleeding. And I could handle losing our child." I suddenly remembered when we first started dating. Ethan held the steering wheel and told me, "This passenger seat is yours. Only you can sit here." I was so happy that day that I posted a picture of the car window on Snapchat. The caption read, "My exclusive spot." Later, Chloe came back to the country. The first time she got into the car, she sat in the front. I asked Ethan why. He said she got car sick. He told me not to be petty. It turned out my exclusive spot was just a temporary loan while Chloe was away. And now, the passenger seat wasn't mine. There was no room for me in the back either. Just like the day of the crash, I was always put last. And I was always the one who could be forgotten. I took an Uber back to our house alone. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror several times. "Miss, do you need me to take you to the ER?" I said no. There was no one waiting for me at the hospital anyway. When I got home, there was soup simmering in the kitchen. Wild mushroom chicken soup. Chloe's favorite. On the coffee table, her anxiety meds, heating pad, and pain patches were laid out neatly. Everything was perfectly prepared. My anti-inflammatory meds were still crumpled inside the hospital plastic bag. No one opened them. No one asked. No one even remembered I had just had surgery. That evening, Ethan came back. He brought a container of porridge. He set it in front of me. "Your sister couldn't finish it. Don't let it go to waste." The porridge was already lukewarm. I looked at the thin layer of skin forming on top and didn't touch it. Ethan frowned. "Your stomach is weak. Eat a little." I suddenly smiled. He actually remembered my stomach was weak. But remembering didn't stop him from handing me someone else's leftovers. Chloe's call came right at that moment. Ethan answered almost instantly. Her voice was soft and crying on the other end. "Ethan, I'm scared to sleep alone." Ethan had already picked up his car keys. "I'm coming over." I looked up at him. "Ethan." He stopped. I asked, "If I were the one scared tonight, would you rush over like this too?" He frowned. "Chloe just survived a car crash. Don't compare yourself to her at a time like this." The door shut. Only the cold porridge was left in the quiet house. I stared at it for a while. Then I opened my laptop and went to the relocation system. The button to confirm the transfer was glowing. I clicked it. Asterisk transfer confirmed. Asterisk. The words on the screen were small, but they felt like a door opening right in front of me. 3 days after the crash, Ethan took me to the Vance family estate for dinner. He said Chloe was shaken up, and the family wanted to check on her. I had just finished surgery, and I still had to hold the walls to walk. Before we left, he looked at me. It wasn't out of concern. It was a warning. Don't let the elders see you looking miserable. I lowered my head and wrapped my scarf. I didn't answer. The dinner table at the Vance estate was lively. Every dish was Chloe's favorite. Honey-glazed ribs, sweet potato casserole, sweet butternut squash soup. I couldn't eat sweet foods due to my stomach condition. Ethan knew this. In the past, when my stomach flared up, he would push all the sweet dishes away. He used to say, "My girl isn't going to the hospital over a plate of food." Back then, I really thought he loved me. But today, Chloe placed a honey-glazed rib into my bowl. "Elena, eat more." I looked at the sticky, sweet rib. I slowly put down my forks. Ethan's face darkened instantly. "She's just being nice. Don't ruin the mood." The relatives fell silent for a second. Soon, someone laughed to break the tension. "These two sisters are just like when they were kids. One is delicate, the other is stubborn." Back then, we all thought Ethan would marry Chloe. But Elena is lucky. She got a great husband in the end. Chloe lowered her head. Her voice was soft. Don't say that. It will make Elena sad. Ethan didn't defend me. He only said, let's not talk about the past. The past. Those words fell so lightly. Sitting there, I suddenly felt like an outsider. I was the one who was legally Ethan's wife. Yet the way they looked at me, it was like I was a thief who had stolen Chloe's rightful place. My mother-in-law pulled out a brochure. Chloe is psychologically fragile right now. The doctor suggests she spend 3 months at a coastal recovery retreat. The retreat has a great environment, and Ethan has already paid half. She pushed the brochure in front of me. For the rest of the bill, you should take out your fertility savings. You're still young anyway. You can always have kids later. My fingers froze. That savings. I had saved it dollar by dollar. I had dreamed of buying a crib, baby clothes, and a stroller once the baby was born. But now the baby was gone. And they wanted to take that money to pay for Chloe's luxury retreat. I looked at Ethan. He didn't look away. He only said, we need to prioritize her right now. I asked, what if I told you the baby is already gone? The table fell dead silent. Chloe's tears instantly started flowing. Elena, are you still blaming me for sitting in the front seat? Please don't use a baby to scare me. I'll die of guilt. Ethan's brow furrowed deeply. That's enough. I looked at him. His voice was extremely low. Don't use a child to fight for my attention. You know how easily she blames herself. Why do you have to trigger her? At that moment, I suddenly lost all energy to explain, even when I admitted to losing our child. In his eyes, it was just a cheap trick to make him jealous. Chloe clutched her chest, saying she couldn't breathe. Ethan immediately stood up to support her. He brushed past me, yelling for the family doctor. I looked down and opened my phone. I searched for a divorce agreement template, and I typed Ethan's name in, letter by letter. I had written his name so many times before. On our wedding invitations. On our house deed. On my pregnancy checkup forms. But it had never felt as smooth and effortless as it did now. Back at our house for the first time, Ethan didn't immediately run off to Chloe. He placed a bowl of warm soup in front of me. His voice was softer. I'll take you to the hospital for a checkup tomorrow. I haven't paid enough attention to you these past few days. Once Chloe stabilizes, we'll focus on us. I looked at him. This felt exactly like every other late compensation he had offered before. Once Chloe stabilizes. Once Chloe is fine. Once Chloe stops crying. In the end, I was always the one left waiting. Ethan reached out to touch my face. I turned away. His hand froze in the air. I asked him, Ethan, if she and I both needed you tomorrow, who would you choose first? He frowned slightly. That's a pointless question. The next second, his phone rang. It was a voice message from Chloe. She was sobbing hysterically. Ethan, I shouldn't be alive. I'm just getting in the way of your marriage. If it weren't for me, Elena wouldn't hate you so much. Ethan's face changed instantly. I looked at him. Didn't you say you'd take me to the hospital tomorrow? He gripped his phone. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, I just need to make sure she's safe. I'll be right back. I smiled. Right back. On the day of the crash, he should have remembered me right back too. But he told the firefighters. There was no one else inside. Ethan grabbed his coat. Before opening the door, he looked back at me. Wait for me. Once the door closed, the house became completely quiet. I sat there for a while. Then I stood up and placed the signed divorce papers on the coffee table. The abortion report. The post-surgery diagnosis. The ultrasound picture. And my wedding ring. I pressed them all down under the papers. I transferred the fertility savings back to my personal account. That was my money for my baby. Now that the baby was gone. Not a single cent of it was going to Chloe's wellness retreat. My suitcase had been packed long ago. I deactivated my phone number. I deleted all my social media accounts. No notes. No goodbyes. I went straight to the airport. It was past midnight when Ethan finally came home. Chloe had only taken 2 sleeping pills. The doctor said she just needed some sleep. When he opened the door, the house was dark. He instinctively called my name. No one answered. Half the master closet was empty. My usual skincare products on the vanity were gone. My toothbrush in the bathroom was gone too. Ethan's face turned pale. He rushed to the living room. There, he saw the divorce papers on the coffee table. He saw the medical report that read, miscarriage, uterine trauma, future conception will be difficult. And he saw the ultrasound picture pressed beneath them. In the photo, the tiny gestational sac was just a blurry dot. It was the surprise I had wanted to give him. Ethan stood frozen. His fingers shook so badly he could barely hold the paper. He desperately started dialing my number. But only a cold automated voice answered. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. The phone fell from Ethan's hand, bouncing off the hardwood floor with a dull, hollow crack. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. The automated female voice repeated the phrase 3 times before the line went dead. Ethan stood frozen in the center of the dark living room. The ultrasound photo trembled between his fingers. On the thermal paper, the tiny black dot, the gestational sac that was less than 6 weeks old, seemed to burn into his palm, like white-hot iron. He dropped to his knees right beside the coffee table. "Elena?" he rasped out, his voice cracking into a dry, pathetic whimpering sound. "Elena, stop playing, come out." He scrambled on his hands and knees into the master bedroom, throwing open the closet doors. Half the wardrobe was gone. The hangers swung empty, clinking against each other in the quiet room. Her jewelry box on the vanity was open, empty except for a single bottle of anti-inflammatory pills he had never bothered to look at. He lunged for his phone, frantically dialing the hospital. "Connect me to Dr. Reed," Ethan shouted into the speaker, his chest heaving like a wounded animal's. "The patient? Elena Vance. She was discharged yesterday. Where did she go?" The night nurse on duty paused, her voice turning cold over the line. "Mr. Vance, are you asking about your wife's condition now? Where is she?" "Mrs. Vance underwent an emergency dilation and curettage 3 nights ago to clear the necrotic tissue from a severe traumatic miscarriage," the nurse said, her tone laced with unvarnished disgust. "She suffered massive internal bleeding because she was left trapped in a crushed vehicle for over 30 minutes after the crash. She signed her own consent forms because her husband was in the adjacent VIP suite comforting a patient with a wrist scratch. No one else inside." The words he had spoken to the firefighter 3 days ago echoed in Ethan's ears like a thunderclap. "Take her to the hospital first. She can't handle any shock." Ethan's phone slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor again. He remembered the smell of gasoline in the air that night. He remembered the smoke curling up from the crushed trunk of their sedan. He remembered holding Chloe in his arms, feeling the warm, light weight of her body, while 10 feet behind them, his pregnant wife was pinned beneath 2 tons of deformed steel, her blood soaking through her dress in the dark. He had closed the door on her himself. His phone began to vibrate against the floorboards. The screen lit up with Chloe's name. Ethan picked it up, his breath ragged. "Ethan." Chloe's voice came through, soft, timid, and weeping. "I had a bad nightmare. My wrist hurt so much. Can you come back to the retreat? I need you to hold my hand." Ethan listened to the sweet, delicate voice that he had spent 3 years protecting, the voice that had dictated every decision, every argument, every dollar in his marriage. A wave of violent, suffocating nausea surged up his throat. "Chloe," Ethan whispered, his voice dropping into a register so dark and cold it didn't sound human. "Were you awake when the firefighters pulled us out?" Chloe paused on the other end, her weeping slowing down slightly. What do you mean, Ethan? I was so scared, I fainted." "The rear window was shattered right beside your seat," Ethan said, his voice shaking with a terrifying, quiet rage. "You looked at the back seat before I opened your door. Did you see her?" "Ethan, you're scaring me," Chloe cried out, her tone instantly shifting back to her practiced, fragile panic. "I don't remember anything. Why are you asking me this? My chest hurts. I can't breathe." "Don't call me again," Ethan cut her off flatly, hanging up the phone and blocking her number instantly. He stood up from the floor, grabbed his coat, and ran out into the rainy night. At 2 a.m., Ethan stood inside the Central District Fire Station. The chief on duty recognized him immediately. "Mr. Vance? The accident report was finalized yesterday. Your insurance company already pulled the salvage vehicle." "I need to hear the dispatch logs," Ethan said. His clothes were soaked with rain, his face pale as chalk, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. "The audio recording from the rescue crew's body cams." The chief frowned, sensing something deeply wrong, but pulled up the archived audio file on his computer anyway. The speaker crackled with static, followed by the heavy sound of rain, sirens, and the roar of a burning engine bay. "Focus on the passenger side. Get the hydraulic cutter. The driver is out. He's holding a female victim. Is there anyone else inside?" Then came Ethan's own voice, clear, sharp, and entirely unhesitating. "No one else. Take her to the hospital first. She's always been terrified of pain. She can't handle any shock." Ethan buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking in violent, silent jerks. The audio kept playing. "Wait. Captain, look at the rear window. Jesus Christ. There's a woman in the back seat. Her legs are pinned under the floorboard. She's bleeding out. Get the jaws of life. Now. She's conscious. She's trying to hold onto the door frame, ma'am. Stay still. Don't move. Captain, the fuel line just ruptured. We have less than 2 minutes before the tank ignites." A firefighter's voice came through the radio, panting heavily, shouting over the hiss of foam. "We got her out. She's breathing. but her abdomen took the full force of the side impact bar. Get the trauma unit. Ethan collapsed onto the metal folding chair beside the desk. He remembered waking up in the hospital that night. He had sat by Chloe's bed, watching the nurse apply a tiny adhesive bandage to her wrist, while in the trauma bay down the hall, 3 surgeons were fighting to stop the hemorrhage in his wife's womb. When he walked into her room later that night, he had seen her holding a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. He had looked at her pale face, felt annoyed by her silence, and walked right back out to buy Chloe a warm container of mushroom chicken soup. He had given her the leftovers. "Mr. Vance?" the fire chief asked softly, looking at the broken man sitting before him. "Are you all right?" Ethan didn't answer. He stood up like a marionette with severed strings, stumbled out into the pouring rain, and drove straight to the Vance family estate. At 8 a.m., the Vance family dining hall was bathed in the warm morning sun. Ethan's mother sat at the head of the table, sipping her morning tea while Chloe sat beside her, wrapped in a plush cashmere shawl, looking small and sweet. "Ethan, you're back early," his mother smiled, setting down her cup. "Did you bring Elena?" "I told her she needs to transfer her fertility savings to Chloe's recovery retreat by noon today." Ethan walked into the room. His suit was ruined, drenched with mud and rain. His hair was matted to his forehead, and his hands were covered in dried blood from where he had punched his own steering wheel during the drive over. "Ethan?" Chloe gasped, her eyes widening in worry as she stood up to reach for him. "What happened to you? Where were you last night?" Ethan didn't look at her. He walked straight over to his mother, pulling out his phone and laying the electronic audit report from the company's legal accounts flat on the table. "The fertility savings," Ethan rasped out, his voice completely dead. "Elena didn't save that money from our household budget. It was her personal inheritance from her late father." His mother frowned, her tone instantly turning cold. "So what? She's your wife. Her money is Vance family money. Chloe suffered a severe shock because of your car crash." "Chloe didn't suffer a shock," Ethan interrupted, turning his head slowly to look at Chloe for the first time. Chloe flinched, stepping back slightly behind his mother. "Ethan, what are you saying?" "The traffic camera at the intersection captured the interior of our car 2 seconds before impact," Ethan said, pulling up a printout of the crash analysis. "The truck hit us from the rear left. Elena's side took 80% of the kinetic energy." He pointed a shaking finger at the photo. "You weren't asleep, Chloe. You saw the truck coming in your side mirror. You reached over, grabbed my arm, and pulled me across your chest so my body would block the glass shards on your side." Chloe's face drained of every drop of color. No, Ethan. I didn't. I was terrified. And when I got out of the car," Ethan continued, his voice dropping into a whisper that made the entire room freeze, "you looked at the back seat. You saw Elena's hand pressed against the glass, covered in blood. You knew she was in there." "Ethan," his mother scolded, slamming her hand on the table. "That's enough. Chloe is delicate. How can you accuse her of such horrible things?" "She knew," Ethan roared, slamming both palms onto the table so hard the china rattled. "And so did you." He turned on his mother, his bloodshot eyes burning with absolute, terrifying despair. "Elena was pregnant. She was carrying your grandchild. And you told the family doctor to ignore her surgery because Chloe was crying about a scratch on her wrist." The dining room went dead silent. His mother's fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. She stared at Ethan, her mouth opening and closing, her face turning from red to a pale sickly gray. "Pregnant?" His mother stammered, her voice shaking. "Elena was? She lost the baby." Ethan wept, tears finally bursting from his eyes as he collapsed against the back of a chair. "She lost the baby in the car while I was carrying Chloe out. She underwent surgery alone. She signed her own consent forms while I was buying Chloe chicken soup." Chloe stood paralyzed by the table, her hands shaking as she looked at Ethan's mother, seeking help. "Auntie, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was pregnant." "Get out," Ethan said quietly. Chloe froze. "What?" "Get out of my house," Ethan said, looking up at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated revulsion. "Get out of my family's sight. If I ever see your face again, I will have the corporate legal team audit every single cent my mother transferred to your accounts over the last 3 years." "Ethan," his mother panicked, standing up. "You can't do that to Chloe. Her father saved your father's life." "Her father died 10 years ago, mother," Ethan screamed, his voice cracking with sheer unyielding rage. "And I have paid for his legacy with my wife's blood and the life of my own child. We are done." He turned on his heel, ignoring Chloe's hysterical sobs and his mother's frantic cries, and walked out into the cold morning wind. 2 years later, The coastal city of St. Jude was bathed in the warm, brilliant sunlight of early summer. The ocean breeze carried the clean, salty scent of the tide rustling through the palm trees along the Grand Avenue. Inside the glass-walled executive office of the Vancelin Logistics conglomerate, the atmosphere was bright, productive, and serene. Elena sat behind a large mahogany desk, reviewing the quarterly expansion reports for the southern maritime routes. She wore a simple, tailored cream-colored suit, her hair styled in a sleek, elegant bob. Her face was healthy, her skin glowing under the sunlight, her eyes clear, sharp, and completely unburdened by the ghosts of the past. When she had taken the relocation transfer 2 years ago, she had severed every connection to her old life. She had built the southern branch from the ground up, turning a struggling subsidiary into a multi-million-dollar logistics powerhouse. A light knock sounded at the door. Her chief assistant, Sarah, walked in holding a warm cup of coffee and a leather-bound folder. Director Lynn, Sarah smiled warmly, setting the cup on the desk. The Regional Transportation Summit begins at 3 o'clock. The delegates from the Northern Territory have just arrived at the hotel. Elena took a sip of the coffee, nodding smoothly. Are the contract drafts ready? Yes, ma'am. All set. Sarah hesitated for a second, glancing at her tablet. By the way, the former lead representative for the Northern Territory, Mr. Ethan Vance, is among the delegates. Elena's hand holding the cup didn't shake. Her expression didn't flicker. She simply set the porcelain saucer down with a quiet click. Is he? Elena asked, her voice entirely flat, as if Sarah had just mentioned the arrival of a minor vendor. Yes. According to the industry reports, Vance Enterprises suffered major financial losses over the past 18 months following a high-profile corporate restructuring and the withdrawal of their primary investment board. Sarah explained carefully. Mr. Vance resigned from his position as CEO 3 months ago. He is currently attending the summit as a secondary consultant. Elena picked up her pen, marking a section on her report. Ensure the seating arrangements follow the standard protocol, Elena said, calmly, without looking up. We begin at 3 sharp. Understood, Director. Sarah stepped out, closing the heavy wooden door behind her. Elena looked out the window at the blue ocean stretching toward the horizon. 2 years ago, she had thought the pain in her abdomen would linger forever. She had thought the ghost of her unborn child would trap her in a permanent winter. But time, work, and the clean ocean air had healed the scars. The wound on her body had closed, leaving only a faint, pale line below her waist, a reminder not of what she had lost, but of the strength she had found when she walked away from the dark. She closed the file, stood up, and pulled her crisp suit jacket over her shoulders. It was time for the meeting. The grand ballroom of the St. Jude International Hotel was packed with over 300 corporate leaders, logistics directors, and media reporters. Elena stood near the central podium, surrounded by her executive team, discussing the upcoming port expansion with several international investors. She was radiant. The way she carried herself, confident, graceful, completely commanding the room, drew the eyes of everyone in the hall. Near the back of the auditorium, standing beside a pillar, was a man. Ethan looked unrecognizably ruined. He wore a dark, slightly wrinkled suit that hung loosely off his gaunt frame. His hair was streaked with gray at the temples, his jaw covered in rough stubble, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. For 2 years he had searched every city, every hospital, and every corporate directory in the country. He had hired private investigators, spent millions of dollars, and driven himself to the brink of physical collapse, desperate for a single trace of her. And now there she stood, 20 feet away, under the bright chandeliers, laughing softly at a joke made by a foreign investor, completely alive, completely whole, and completely untouched by his existence. Ethan's breath hitched in his chest. A sharp, physical pain tore through his ribs, so intense he had to grab the edge of the pillar to keep from falling to his knees. He took a step forward. His boots felt like lead against the carpeted floor. Elena. He rasped out, his voice thin, dry, and trembling. The noise of the crowd swallowed his voice. He took another step, pushing past 2 junior delegates, his eyes locked entirely on her face. Elena. This time, his voice cracked loudly enough that several people near the podium turned around. Elena stopped talking. She turned her head slowly. Her clear, dark eyes locked onto his face. For a brief, agonizing second, the entire ballroom seemed to fall silent. Ethan stood there, his hands shaking at his sides, his chest heaving, tears instantly welling in his bloodshot eyes. He looked at her like a starving man, looking at a feast he could never touch. He took 3 frantic steps toward her, reaching out his trembling hand. Elena, it's me. Ethan choked out, his voice cracking into a pathetic, "Vaping sobi. I found you. I finally found you." Elena didn't run. She didn't flinch. She didn't look afraid or angry or shocked. She simply stood her ground, her posture straight, looking at him with an expression of absolute, impenetrable indifference. It was the same look she had given him in the hospital ward 2 years ago, the look of a woman looking at a stranger who had accidentally bumped into her on the street. Mr. Vance, Elena said softly. Her voice was smooth, cool, and perfectly professional. Welcome to the St. Jude Logistics Summit. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks. Her tone was so polite, so detached, so utterly devoid of any history that it struck him harder than a physical blow. Elena, please, Ethan whimpered, falling to one knee right there on the polished floor, ignoring the shocked gasps of the surrounding executives and reporters. Don't talk to me like that. Call me Ethan, please. He reached into his coat pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out a small, faded velvet box. He opened it. Inside lay her old wedding ring. The one she had left pressed beneath the divorce papers on the coffee table 2 years ago. I kept it, Ethan wept, holding the ring up toward her like a desperate beggar. I cut Chloe off. I left the family. I sold the estate. I have nothing left, Elena. I just want you to come home. Please give me one more chance. The reporters in the crowd frantically pulled out their cameras, flashes blinding the air around them. Elena looked down at the man kneeling at her feet. She looked at the faded velvet box, then looked at his bloodshot, weeping eyes. Mr. Vance, Elena said, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet ballroom, loud enough for every microphone to capture. The divorce decree was finalized by the court 18 months ago. We have no personal relationship. Ethan's shoulders shook violently. Elena, our baby. I know about the baby. The baby died in the car, Mr. Vance, Elena said, her voice dropping into a register so quiet, so cold, and so final that it made the temperature in the room plummet. The same car you told the firefighters was empty. Ethan's face went completely gray. He collapsed forward, his forehead pressing against the carpet at her feet, letting out a choked, blood-curdling sob that tore from his throat like torn metal. Elena took 2 steps back, completely stepping out of his reach. She turned to her assistant, her face serene and unbothered. Sarah, Elena said smoothly, please have security escort Mr. Vance to the medical lounge. He seems unwell. We have a presentation to finish. Yes, Director Lin, Sarah nodded firmly, signaling for security officers who immediately stepped forward to haul the weeping, thrashing man off the floor. Elena turned her back on him, walked up the stairs to the central podium, and picked up her microphone. She didn't look back once. 1 year later, on the outskirts of the northern capital, a small, modest cottage sat near the edge of a pine forest. The house was dark. Inside the living room, a single lamp flickered on the side table, casting long, lonely shadows across the wooden floorboards. Ethan sat on the sofa, wearing a plain cotton shirt, holding a glass of cold water. His hair was completely white at the temples, his face gaunt, his eyes hollowed out, staring blankly at the dark fireplace. On the coffee table before him lay 3 items. A small, faded ultrasound picture with a tiny black dot, an old, dried bouquet of baby's breath flowers, and a newspaper clipping from the St. Jude Business Daily, featuring a large photograph of Elena standing on a sunlit stage, receiving the National Commerce Award. Every evening, Ethan sat in the quiet house, listening to the rain tapping against the window panes. He didn't drink. He didn't go out. He didn't talk to anyone. He spent his days remembering. He remembered the day they got married, the small bouquet of baby's breath she had held so tightly in her hands while he refused to smile for the camera. He remembered the wild mushroom chicken soup he had brought home for Chloe while Elena sat alone in her room with a cold container of leftover porridge. And he remembered the cold, dark back seat of the sedan, where his wife had bled in the dark while he carried another woman into the light. He picked up the dried bouquet of baby's breath, holding it against his face, breathing in the scent of dust and dead leaves, weeping silently into the dark, until the sun came up. In St. Jude, the summer ocean stretched endlessly under a bright blue sky. Elena stood on the deck of a private yacht, her white silk scarf fluttering in the warm breeze. Beside her stood her core team, celebrating the successful launch of their new international shipping line. They were laughing, clinking glasses of champagne, their faces bright with the joy of accomplishment. Elena took a sip of her drink, looking out at the boundless, sparkling water. Ahead, the pain was gone, the scar had faded, and her life was finally, beautifully, undeniably her own.